Today is May 15th, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekocheches Tokom Aki, or Tekots Nakotene Siku. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she, her, they, them pronouns. My Dene lineage roots me in the land of the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the Hare people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe and Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name which has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. Acknowledging proximity to whiteness is important because the darker the skin, the more racism a person experiences. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act imposed status card by the Canadian government says Yellow Knives Dene. Through my father, I am a daughter of the Mayflower and a daughter of the American Revolution. Having a Canadian Indian Act imposed status card is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two Spirit or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians can't even find suitable employment. So, on one hand, you have Calgarians complaining about the lack of workforce, but on the other hand, 31% of racialized Calgarians can't even find suitable employment. I am not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous peoples, but I share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma informed Dene woman who's attempted to joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for incarceration, a denial of justice, denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples. I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems that are meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for the so called country named Canada. I hope all folks see their role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never be 1 month. It's important to understand that the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on these lands by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as a guest, acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Absolutely. It's important land acknowledgements have meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with their acknowledgement of their ancestors, story of displacement, how they perceive their role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement. So we as Indigenous peoples know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, you won't say your pronouns, your story of origin, acknowledge stolen lands, acknowledge imposed economic oppression, or your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around for my community, my family, and myself, because we face the most colonial violence based on ignorance or worse, willful anti Indigenous biases. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me that you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Just say Winty's book Unreconciled explains that perfectly, as do many Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet, or north of the border are the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7, signed September 22nd, 1877, with signatures that include the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Goodstoney, formerly Wesley, Chiniki, and Bearspaw Nations of the Stoney, or the Ihahi Nations, and the Dene from Tsuut'ina, I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit status, and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps, whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. Today, I am lucky enough to have a good friend come onto the podcast and tell me all about a new initiative. Would you like to introduce yourself in your way?
Sego, Nathaniel Youngyats. Good morning, everyone. My name is Nathaniel. Thank you, Michelle, for having me on your podcast this morning. Just reflecting on kind of what you just talked about in terms of introducing yourself and where you come from. For me, it's a bit more challenging in these times of everybody questioning identity. So my great grandfather, Richard Barker, was Ganyang Gehaga from Eastern Ontario, and enfranchised after World War II after serving in the Canadian Army. My great grandmother was from England on my grandfather's side. My grandmother, so my mom's mom, both her parents are from Quebec. And then my dad is a second generation immigrant from Guyana, which is just on the tip of South America, is of Indo-Caribbean descent. So I come to you with all these kind of mixed distant relations and trying to navigate my own identity as a Canadian, which has kind of led to this project that Michelle has invited me on today to talk about, which is called Be Heard Project Canada. And it's a collective of racialized Canadians that came together to address the question around underrepresentation within the Canadian government system. So whether it's municipal politics, provincial or territorial politics, or federal, and acknowledging the challenge that a lot of racialized people have, whether you're Black, a person of color, or Indigenous, and questioning your engagement with Canada's system. I know of a lot of people that, at least within the Indigenous community, that struggle to understand how that system works and navigating the two of not ceding or surrendering sovereignty or jurisdiction, while also trying to leverage space and roles within the Canadian system to right the wrongs of the past and to ensure that Canada maintains its honor as a treaty partner, as well as its nation-to-nation relationship and the obligations that it owes our people. So that's kind of a quick intro of who I am and the project that we'll be talking about today.
That's awesome. I'm so glad you did that because I got an email from you saying, hey, can you all, support this and that? So I had a look and I looked on the YouTube and immediately subscribed and immediately shared it with all of my contacts. And my hope is to increase that engagement because I think as, QT BIPOC and BIPOC, we all have to kind of be in solidarity and we have to work together in order to really talk about how we go about creating meaningful anti-racism policies and having meaningful inclusion as opposed to performative. Do you want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, I think the challenge becomes when we start blending everything together, and that was the challenge of our approach was like I've seen the conversation, the narrative, and I understand coming from a mixed background myself of like not blending these struggles of Black Canadians and persons of color with the struggles of Indigenous people, because it is really kind of two different relationships, but both are rooted in colonial oppression, right? So one is natured in English and French, bringing people here, whereas the other is English and French coming and displacing our people and making false promises as to the nature of the relationship. And you see some of these things like the Peace and Friendship Treaties, Treaty 11, and the original intent behind them. And you look at what the elders said was proposed at those signing arrangements or those meetings along, say, the Mackenzie Valley or the Decho region, and then you compare it to Canada's position. And if that's how the relationship is already starting, of somebody that convinced you of like, oh yeah, just enter into this treaty and there will be no real displacement. We will respect your sovereignty, your way of government. By the way, the king has signed this royal proclamation saying we are to respect your way of being. And then the moment that Canada becomes its own thing, it's complete disregard that. And then, by the way, 150 plus years later, why are you complaining about kind of the way things are? Obviously, there's no barriers for you to enter into the Canadian system. Just look at the people we've elected. Just look at the people we've made as cabinet ministers. And just because somebody looks like you doesn't mean that they represent your community interests or your background.
Yeah.
And vice versa. Just because somebody's from your community doesn't necessarily mean that they speak for the whole community, right? And so that was the whole kind of the premise of developing this project, was we want to remove partisanship from the equation. And I know myself, like I grew up kind of involved with the Liberal Party, and I think my challenge has become of looking past how hyper partisan we've become, of labeling conservatives as bad people or NDP as whatever. And it's beyond that. We all have the same vision of making Canada a better place. It's really just a different way of getting to that point. But nobody is wishing ill for our people or our communities. And the people that are intermixing ideological labels with racism, whatever else, I think we have to de-link the two, of an understanding that like we need to address the representation piece in terms of decision making by enabling more people that look like us, that come from our communities, to step forward and feel comfortable in understanding the process, which has not necessarily always been available to us, right? So if you don't come from old money or a way of being involved politically, or just a family that is more politically inclined, you may not know that democracy is within reach for you. So whether you're the butcher at the local shop or you're an elder in a community, everybody has a different perspective to bring to the table and contextual to the times, right? And so when we started this project in 2019, 2020, is just on the cusp of when COVID had hit the world. And it began just a bit before that. And so there was the context of the 2019 election, and we kind of discussed just amongst a group of us that had kind of fallen out from being involved politically and trying to focus on our own lives, of the reality of just the same old thing over and over again.
Yeah.
And the group thing. And there was no real place or seeing people come forward that had a different way of thinking in terms of community representation or ideas, or really the best interests of the community, right? And so as the pandemic hit and we all kind of had to hit pause on everything, it gave a bit more space to think through like what are the real barriers that we could, as just grassroots people that have been involved at some point, do to help kind of reduce the barriers. And it's not to say that all of them are gone, but at least you're not paying to go to a campaign college or having to commute or know somebody to get an inroads for a Liberal or NDP or Conservative or Green campaign college or anything like that. And so, yeah, we tried to flush this out, develop it with a whole bunch of racialized Canadians that had either been past or present politicians or campaign managers or community organizers, field organizers. And we developed this content and hit some snags in the road. Initially, I think we had tried to launch it about 2 years ago, but just by the nature of people's availability and timing, we just didn't get to the point of finishing it. And so in the past couple of weeks, we managed to finish it, and it seemed to be a timely conversation in terms of representation as well as nomination races. And I know that this is coming up with a lot of the questions of foreign interference and the integrity of nomination races, especially of the two major parties of the Liberals and the Conservatives. And the fact that Elections Canada doesn't govern nomination races. It's really the parties that dictate the policy.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to be cognizant of the fact that we're not going to have all the answers for people, but we want to draw out the questions and thoughts so that people could start to really formulate the idea of, is running for office actually something that I want to do? Or is there some critical kind of question of policy or decision making that's going on that I feel that the people in power don't have a vested interest into because they don't come from my community, because they don't look like me, because their uncle or brother or mom has not suffered historic injustices or ongoing injustices of the criminal justice system that Canada continues to over incarcerate racialized people, and whether it's Indigenous or Black. And I know Canada is developing an Indigenous justice strategy and a Black justice strategy. But again, it can only, these kind of major decisions can only go as far as the people in power are invested into them.
Yeah, and depending on who's in power. So, for example, I find that we might all agree on this concept, and then there's a change in the color of the government, and so then it either, if it doesn't get scrapped entirely, it does get reworked. I do a lot of outreach for municipal and provincial here, and I go to sleep at night knowing I was at the table, I wrote down my ideas, my suggestions, and it might just be on a shelf collecting dust somewhere in the archives of the Alberta legislature and or the city, but at least I tried. And I don't want that for my daughter. I don't want that for the next generations. I would really prefer to see systemic changes. And but I also agree with you that we need to engage with the different communities and make it seem like they are as able to run as anyone else. And obviously, I'm so looking forward to going through your entire video series because I read Tragedy in the Commons, and they have a podcast I haven't got to. It's on my to-do list, but again, I don't have an invested interest to listen to white people talk about the problems in Canadian politics. I do have more of an invested issue or invested interest in learning why BIPOC people are, struggling in the structure of the Westminster imposed Canadian system that we have here, both at all orders of government, not just the federal one, right? So, for me, I really am excited about this project, and that's obviously why I wanted to have you on the podcast so that we could promote it and bigger picture. I do want people to run that don't look like Danielle Smith's cabinet. I want them to look like Canada, as opposed to a small minority group of people that have always been in charge of Canada. So, so I'm grateful that you've been doing this work. What were some of your highlights of doing this work?
Yeah, so I think the two major highlights for me were the lived experiences of past politicians. So especially our module 3 on developing your pitch with Selena Cesar Chavin. She was able to give some kind of key insights just after she had released her book. And so it was great to kind of have her perspective that maybe wasn't as she was just able to give us kind of a more critical like reflection on how these things are engaged.
Yeah.
And then the flip side is people that had been involved politically in grassroots campaigns when around the same time that I had been involved with the 2015 election. And so just their own lived experiences as people of color, as immigrants, of how they see themselves involved in the system, and how people can become critical kind of cogs on the wheel of affecting change, and really kind of tearing down those barriers or those perceptions that there's that you don't fit within the system, because in an evolving Canada, everybody has a place in the
Mhm.
system. It doesn't matter your educational background, your economic background, your racial background. It's really up to your own personal choice of whether or not you get involved. And obviously, fear plays a big part in that, or the impact on personal life. So, for example, so I'm on the traditional territory of the Kwanlin Dun First Nation up here in Whitehorse right now. And there was a incident, I think it was last week, where an elected official's office was targeted and attacked. And the premier had to put out a statement that like this is not acceptable. And so I had a conversation with a friend that is mixed ancestry up here as well as racialized. So he's a person of color as well as indigenous. And he brought up the point of why would people of color or why would indigenous people put themselves through this if this is how people are still reacting? And the issue was around COVID restrictions for the Yukon from a couple of years ago. And so this is just kind of the challenge, right? Of you have people that want to do good by their community, regardless of political ideology,
Mm-hmm.
but are attacked and targeted, whether it's them as individuals or their families. And it's just kind of it's a challenge that's increasing for racialized people that are considering running for office. And I think that's kind of the next big thing that the government itself needs to take on, whether it's federal, provincial, territorial, or municipal, is how do you provide safety to people that are engaged in this Westminster system um, without kind of hyper accelerating this whole divide and attacking and targeting people because of what they look like or because of their upbringing, right? And so
You
this
know
is
what? I never even heard about the incident, and I like to think I'm pretty much like keyed in on that. So just to give you perspective, for whatever reason, it was missing on my radar that this had even happened. And kind of back to your point, like we have I think it was the RCMP that came out and said they want to see legislation to protect our politicians. And there was actually a lot of outcry from a lot of folks. And I was trying to understand that. And I was like, I'll have to look into that another day. And I just kind of left it and let it be. But I mean, here especially, we have our mayor, racialized woman. She's had protesters in front of her house. Randy Bossino up in Edmonton has some kind of van that's been parked in front of his house in his neighborhood honking, upsetting all the neighbors. And I can't understand how there's no mechanism, there's no levers to pull when it comes to this type of harassment. Um, we just had a petition for the removal of Mayor Jyoti Gondak, and they did a small sample. I think it was less than 400, and not one single signature was valid out of the few that he did collect. And he had to collect over 500,000, which he didn't. But of the small numbers he did give, it didn't have that. So now people are more distracted with the conversation that why shouldn't he have to pay, whatever it was, $40,000 to, municipality for this ridiculous behavior. But at the same time, it's like, because this is our democratic right, like it or not. I think he looks like a total, unengaged person when it comes to this conversation in general. Like, he didn't even have to do the petition. All you had to do is listen to him or see some of his tweets and or social media posts and go, oh, ew, this guy has no civics in him at all. And so, and he's sadly taking this as a win to be like, well, here were the barriers. And so I'm like, well, you got zero signatures. Like, what the barriers are there, you couldn't even get people to fill out the signature box properly. And I ran for municipal and provincial. You have to collect signatures in order to even put your name on the ballot, and those have to be vetted and they have to be correct. And the fact he didn't have that level of understanding when it comes to a petition for the mayor. But she is facing death threats regularly. She has bodyguards. She has now she has to have a detail in front of her house. And so, and we've seen a recent MP woman say that she's not going to rerun just because of safety issues, and she doesn't want to put her family through that. And so we're in a real heightened level of political discourse that isn't productive. It's not helping anybody. And I do worry, what does that look like now here for all of our folks that are even thinking about running? I just had my high school reunion. I had a friend ask me, "Are you going to rerun?" And I have obviously learned you never say never. So I said I just don't know if I would do it right again. And I said I wish all Canadians seen themselves as able to run for any order of government, even at the school trustee level. Like we need representation all across all of them. My school boards here are deplorable when it comes to oppression dynamics and anti-racism and Indigenous education. I would love to have a new slate of people come in and bring that lens into this world. So for me, trying to encourage people, but then I had, and I know he was trying to be profound, but he was trying to say to me, a different friend, well, I'm a business owner, so I don't want to possibly mess up my business contacts later. And I'm sure, I don't know if we've ever talked about this before. The amount of people I know that ran, whether for the Liberals or the NDP, that actually had to move out of the province after running because they couldn't find employment. So there is also that level of engagement with businesses to understand that just because somebody tried to do good for the community by running for Green Party or whichever party doesn't mean that they're not worthy of a job. Especially, it's funny, in Alberta we complain about there not being enough workers. We have to bring them all in, but they won't hire the racialized people that are here. And folks who actually have this you know I guess civic engagement to run. That there's not people banging on their door to be a part of their world and improve the country, improve the business, whatever field that we're looking in. So what are your thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a societal reflection we need to have as to the nature of the relationship with government. And I feel that we've gotten to the point now, especially I think COVID accelerated it in terms of the restrictions and um, we can label it the demonization of people that didn't want to get vaccinated. And so it was just like that you saw neighbors becoming angry with each other, family members divided, and I think that translated into our relationship with the government and elected officials. And part of that requires a reset, right? And so I think the the government, whoever it is, whether it's Mr. Trudeau or Mr. Polyev, needs to do a reflection as to the nature of the relationship with Canadians as a whole, with community members, as well as the nature of transparency and engaging people, so that we're not labeling people, regardless of political ideology or partisanship, as essentially enemies of the state or enemies or committing treason against the country, especially in an engaged democracy where no one
Yeah.
person has unilateral power over the whole country,
Mm,
right? So
yeah.
I think these are just kind of like soul searching conversations we need to have. And maybe this is a critical juncture in which the government or Canada as a whole needs to have a conversation about looking to Indigenous legal orders and traditions in terms of healing the Confederacy, right? And so we can look to the Great Law of Peace and look at examples as to how the peacemaker kind of brought together the Five Nations, how the laws are in place to repair fractures when they occur, how people are civically engaged. Um, Again, this is just my own kind of thoughts, but I think there's a big soul searching that we need to do with regards to the state of the country and how politicians are engaging and working with Canadians. Because just as easily as you got elected, you can just as easily be removed
Hmm.
after one term,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
so I think we really do need to think about the longevity of the system so that people are actually showing up and voting, so that people are actually showing up and putting themselves forward for a nomination. so that people want to be involved in some capacity. I'm sure you've seen a decline in the number of people that want to have lawn signs up or sharing things on social media or with their family. It's just kind of we've gotten to the state of conflict over labels,
Yeah.
right? It's not everybody's on the same page. We're
Yeah.
all trying to move the country forward, right? And so, yeah, that's my thoughts on it.
I'm so grateful. I sometimes wonder because I am in Calgary East, where we are like a huge amount of folks from different demographics. And then, when I ran municipally and provincially, that's who the majority of people I was talking to. It's such a trying to make sure all your lit is in different languages and that to make sure that you engage with everybody in a good way. What are your thoughts on this whole concept of foreign interference? Because on one hand, we want more racialized people to um, engage in our democratic system, but now I really feel like there was a conversation of almost xenophobia when it came to this foreign interference, where well, I seen on a lot of social media as the sentiment that, well, we just need to kick him out of our country, and I'm like, well, you know how ridiculous that sounds with a Westminster democratic system that we're using anyway. What are your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I don't know, not I think that there'll be plenty that comes forward from the government, regardless of who's in power, that
Hmm.
move forward to try and address the gaps that are currently in place. I think it's long overdue. I think the challenge is becoming separating the issue of foreign interference of state actors from the people that live here. And
Yeah,
so we look at some of the gaps in the Elections Canada regime and the party nomination system, and the fact that we can have somebody running for office who can only be elected by Canadian citizens. So that's a hard fact, being nominated by people that are not going to be voting for them in that election. And so regardless of your racial background or anything, I think we need to kind of have the hard truth of what does that say about our system, that we have people dictating who's going to be the candidate when they're not actually voting for them. And it's a concerning thought to me, because that really is the bottom line of foreign interference, right? And
mhm.
it's not to say that it's happening everywhere, but it gives opportunity for it to rise. And I think we just do need to have a critical conversation about how that looks, and parties falling under the Elections Canada um, regime and the legislation, to have a more transparent system so that everybody's on the same page about how a nomination is run, how the lists are vetted, how the candidates are chosen.
Mhm.
And so you can still leave each party to decide if they're going to appoint people or have an open nomination. But if you're going to have an open nomination, it should really only be the people that are going to be voting for that same person in the election, um, that are choosing the candidate, right? So it's just like choosing a board of directors. You don't have non-shareholders voting at a shareholder meeting. And that's how I like to think of it. Of like we just need to kind of draw back the basics of running Canada in the same concept as we run a public business, right? Of like let's
Yeah,
look at the fundamentals of rules, and it's for everybody's interest,
yeah.
right? And it's not to rule those people out completely. It's just eventually they will be permanent residents and Canadian citizens, and
Mhm.
they'll be able to engage. But that's a distinct right of Canadian citizens, is to engage in the democratic elected system, right? And that's otherwise, what's the difference really
Yeah.
between being someone on a visitor's visa or travel visa or employment visa
Mhm.
and a citizen, right?
Mhm.
And so I think that's the conversation that needs to be had, and removing and distinguishing elements of racism from the actual constitutional system.
Yeah. Here in Calgary, we have a really interesting conversation happening. It's not, I don't believe it's going to go anywhere because the UCP government's just said this isn't going to go anywhere. So end of discussion. But I do want to throw it at you because I think democratic dialogue is probably one of the most important things. One of the reasons why I got so offended and worked really hard for the 2015 election was there was this, and they called it the Omar Khadr bill. It was Harper's way of trying to say, if you're a first generation Canadian that was born here, we'll still ship you back to your home country of your parents if we deem we can. And so I had a real problem with that because my stepmom was born in Austria, and my brother, while born here in Red Deer, I was really concerned about him just getting shipped off to Austria based off of my politics or something, becoming a political refugee. So that really bothered me. I had told my mom and her family, because they were PR here for about 30 years. And I said, I don't trust this government. You guys better go get your citizenship. And they did. And I was really proud of them for that. But there is a conversation happening here in Calgary now that PR, they pay their taxes and therefore should have the right to be able to vote. And so that conversation has happened. Well, the conversation was started and the UCP said, no, we're not doing that. End of discussion. And so, like you were talking about, like a business, like a shareholder, if you are paying taxes in a place that you've been paying taxes for 30 years, but are unable to vote based off of your citizenship, but we want to reduce barriers and we want to reduce racial inequality, right? I just think that needs to be a part of the discussion somewhere. And right now, I don't feel like there's any sort of space to have that conversation. We have our second Black elected counselor for the first time in my lifetime. That we had one that was a while ago before I could ever remember, and it was a woman. And so, we just don't have much space even for women on our council here in Calgary, unfortunately. Thankfully, we have a mayor that is a brown woman. But again, it goes back to the conversation of diversity, and we just can't even have these discussions. So that's why I'm grateful that you've launched this video series and that you're having that conversation. Other than the YouTube channel, is there any other places that we should be looking for?
Yeah, so it's really the YouTube channel. We tried to make it as kind of like open access as we could, and we figured that would be the best kind of resource since everybody has access to it. You don't need to pay
Yeah,
anything.
perfect.
And so with the 8-part series, you'll go through it and not making promises that you're going to be completely prepared to run for a nomination,
Yeah.
but you're able to draw out all of kind of the critical questions and self-reflection. And so as the Elections Canada Act changes or provincial legislation changes on finances or anything like that, obviously you'll need to kind of revisit those. But things like the Finance 101 module will pretty much cover everything you need to know or think about in terms of finances for running for a nomination
Is
or considering social media strategy, stuff like that. So it's we're trying to give the fundamentals so that everybody is at least on a level playing field, putting forward paperwork and considering running.
Well, I need to send it to the petitioner for Mayor Gondak. I need to forward it to him and see what he thinks because apparently he needs some Civics 101. But I do have some other places that I'm going to happily share that as well. And, I just encourage any of my listeners that please reach out if you cannot find this information. It'll be in the preamble of the show and we'll forward any information as it grows. And I really appreciate you coming onto the show to talk about this initiative, and I want to welcome you back anytime that you have any updates or maybe a new initiative that you want to come and discuss. All of my guests are more than welcome to come back anytime and have these kinds of conversations, because I think all you know all racialized people, we need to really see ourselves as being a part of it. And it was incredible to me to be in central Alberta talking to predominantly white people and them not feeling like they can be engaged, but then the first to go out in a truck and honk their horns. So is there anything else you'd like to add tonight?
No, I just like to thank you for having me on, and just yeah, to your viewers and listeners of your podcast. Yeah, if you're searching up taking the first steps on YouTube, it's the channel is Be Heard Project Canada. So again, 8-part series. It starts with asking the question, why do you want to run? We start that with NDP MP Matthew Green from Hamilton Center, and we go all the way through of kind of the nomination process, developing your pitch. So how are you going to sell yourself as a candidate, and like truly introspecting kind of why you're doing this and your vision, and then going through kind of social media strategy, finances, developing your campaign team and your strategy for getting out the vote and getting those signatures that you need for a nomination,
Yeah.
all the way up to the actual nomination day itself. And then if you theoretically get past that, then it becomes the actual election cycle, right? And so, again, just want to reiterate that, as well as the fact that even though the intent is to increase representation amongst racialized people, it is for all Canadians, regardless if you're white, black, brown, anything, regardless of income background. We truly do just want to help heal the Canadian system at all levels and to increase all the diverse perspectives, especially in a time that a lot of people are struggling, whether it's policy choices, economic impact, stuff like that. Is the more people that represent the concerns of your community, that are there at the table, the more likely that those voices are going to be heard and considered in those policy decisions. And so, yeah, that's really just the end vision, is that at some point in the next 10, 20 years, that we can get to a point where we start seeing more people that of a whole spread of income backgrounds, employment backgrounds, and racial and ethnic backgrounds,
Mhm.
making up all levels of government. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, thanks again for having me on, Michelle.
Oh, so honored. I'm so glad you brought up people's backgrounds economically, because I think of, there being a housing issue right now and the amount of elected landlords that we have. So kind of goes against their best interests to be helping us with some of these housing strategies and rent caps, etc. Right? So I appreciate you bringing all of that up, all the different socioeconomic backgrounds, because wouldn't it be amazing to have diversity in that way in every, uh, whether House of Commons, legislature, or municipality? It would be wonderful to see more of that. So I appreciate all of the work that you did on this project. I can't wait to go through it and promote it as well, because I think we're in a moment right now where people want change, but they don't know how to. And to me, I felt like I had to engage with the political process the best I could in order to see if there was room for me. And so I want to encourage other people and this next generation to see themselves in these positions so that we can make some changes that work as we all evolve and adapt and move forward. And one of my favorite things I heard from this interview that I really appreciated was trying to heal, trying to heal the current discourse and from COVID, what had happened as well. So I really appreciate that, as well as that being a part of this conversation moving forward. So thanks again. Awesome. So I am going to do my exit. You are welcome as my guest to chime in at any point in time and give other resources, as you know. I'm proud that this podcast can constantly give, interviews like this, solutions, cultural safety training, cultural first aid, and all of them to try to create a safer space for Indigenous, people of color, those with disabilities, and to us LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable, out of place, because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, which is up from 75% in 2022. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe racism exists, as opposed to only 66% of non-racialized Calgarians. A really great initiative that I came across was from Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin from heretohelp.bc.ca. They have a whole volume of visions, and it's what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Their work are cultural action tools to help folks see where they belong in this conversation, and you can support work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understanding. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat them here. RacialEquityTools.org, another organization you can go give a donation to, by Donna Bevins. She has tons of resource files on internalized racism, as well as many subjects on racial equity. Do's and Don'ts for Bystander Intervention by American Friends Service Committee. So that's afsc.org. Also, if you're in Calgary and you are from the Asian community and you experience racism, you can report it at acttoendracism.ca or text at 587-507-3838. I'm just giving this social media link out again to a lot of folks who have asked for it and can't seem to find it. It's still available. If you Google Anti-Racism Organizational League for the City of Calgary, you will find the journey of becoming an anti-racism leader, another YouTube video worth watching. Locally, we have the Black Lives Matter activist Taylor McNally and Adora Nofer that were being legally targeted. Please go to Stop the Stack YYC to learn more how to support our Black Lives Matter activists here in Calgary. Indigenous have been talking about our issues, sharing our traumas in reports, commissions, and public hearings, just so it can be regularly disregarded. No more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, or these mental health cuts now, and forced addiction services, know that your vote to this party would directly negatively impact people who are equity seeking and equity deserving. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to actions. The recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples still repeat a lot of the things in both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Those are 231 calls to justice that we can work on making Canada better with. And it has an intersectional lens that helps all Canadians, not just Indigenous people. Provincially, the Kenney government created 113 pathways to justice. The new premier has this new council on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but I have yet to see any work coming from that. Municipally, we have the White Goose Flying Report. Denying all these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism at every institutional level, from justice, education to health, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. Run. I hope that was a big message you got today. You can run and help be a part of this change. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have zero business running. Should be understood by all parties, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs. Google articles on how non-Canadians can, or non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies to Indigenous people. There are tons and tons of articles. Also, the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit. You've noticed that I've referenced the Calgary Foundation a few times. Please go check out their amazing work. Stephanie Harp and I had an emergency contact podcast in the hopes that we would get our allies to write to their elected officials and do more on the homelessness crisis that we are facing. You can also go to aboriginalalert.ca and the Missing Children Society of Canada. Both have apps that you can sign up and or email lists that you can sign up on and get information on people that are missing in your area. Womenshomelessness.ca has a wonderful statement on the urgent action needed to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirit, and gender diverse people experiencing homelessness. We also have a drug crisis that's happening here in Alberta with the highest record that we've ever had. If you know someone that's using substances, please do not use alone. If you are using a loan, you can create a safety plan with the National Overdose Response Service at 888-688-NORS, or you can download their app, the Brave app, Doors app, or the Lifeguard app to help you with creating, because you matter. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society.ca here in Calgary. They provide free one-on-one addictions counseling services, group treatment for recovery in Calgary, are queer-friendly and anti-racist. As many of you have heard, I've also been fully supporting Canada's first 2S LGBTQ addiction recovery center, stonewallrecovery.ca. And if you have funds for either one of those, I'm sure they'd love them. If you are experiencing emotional distress after anything we talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness helpline at 855-242-3310. They also have a website of hopeforwellness.ca where they have a text box. And you can also go to on issues related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit. You can call 844-413-6649. Here in Alberta, we have a 60 Scoop Indigenous Society of Alberta at ssisa.ca, which I recommend you sign up for their emails. The Indian Residential School Survivors and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419. Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868. They also have a text you can go to for 686868. They also have a live chat from 7 p.m. to midnight on Eastern Time. The Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. The LGBT Youth Line, so they don't have the 2 or the Q. It no longer exists, but they still have a text option at 647-694-4275, or you can go to youthline.ca. For non-Indigenous people, there are distress lines in your area, usually a functioning 211, and the new national number of 988, and you can also text 988, or you can go to 988.ca. The following are 2S LGBTQ crisis supports available in most areas across Canada. Toronto, you lucky folks in Division 14 have an Indigenous-led crisis response pilot led by two-spirited people of the First Nations in partnership with 2 other organizations. This Indigenous-led crisis team responds to mental health-related crises and wellness checks for individuals located within Division 14. You can just call 211 in that area. You can also find out more at the number 2spirits.org to find out more. For my American listeners, the Two-Spirit Identity strongheartshelpline.org or 1-844-7-NATIVE is the number you can call. Here in Canada, itgetsbettercanada.org has tons of resources for 2S LGBTQ. Warning for QT BIPOC. I've seen some of the organizations in Alberta listed, and not all of them practice anti-racism nor have Indigenous education. So maybe trying the MMIW line would be better, but obviously just reach out and hopefully you will find the right person. Don't hang up, just keep trying the different lines. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation faces it. This is self-care, how I take my power back, how we have representation as Indigenous people, because Canada generally doesn't like or allow us to speak freely without interruption, without tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions. Many people just don't want to hear our opinion, but sure like to tell us theirs, even if they don't know anything about us. Colonialism, the constant surveillance of Indigenous peoples, our protests, our vigils, and our rights. I and many others share information on microaggressions daily. It's just unacceptable anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism, gatekeepers, folks that survive off the status quo, folks who are really in their trauma and stop people from doing the good work and deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism and colonial violence is an everyday reality for me, Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and others. I do want to say thank you to my ancestors, Masi Cho, to my granny and my mom for what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt. My stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family and roots and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I'm a second generation proud Calgarian. And thank you to my husband for producing and editing this show on top of being my husband, my childhood friend, father of our child, my support down the journey of the red road. He has witnessed decades of sexism and racism, and our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily, and we are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my daughter and my family will understand down in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues. I also want to honor the Blackfoot, as the elders and members have been so kind to me on my road journey, being on their land. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to the Blackfoot and Dene elders and language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments and questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. A second last thing I'd like to do is kind of a touch grass moment. There are a lot of dark things I talk about and we see on social media or media. So touching grass is an expression to reconnect to the world, not too much focused on the screens. And please write me in. I'd love to hear yours as well. And I just wanted to tell folks that for Mother's Day, I went out for Vietnamese, enjoyed every minute of it. And then the next day I got to see my stepmom and I was able to get some Christmas presents, and they were all chocolates from Austria. And they were so, well, they are so yummy. I'm still eating them and I shouldn't, but they're so good. Marzipan, Christmas clauses, they're fantastic. Anyway, I want to end with giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. My beautiful cousin responded once, or you'd be in my dish. Thanks, folks, for listening.